Hello and welcome to lecture 7. This is a very exciting one because we will be talking about the curvature shader. And what it essentially does is it looks for surface normals and creates you a mask for a certain threshold of the angle or the normal angle of that surface to the next. So as you can see, I have a more detailed model on the left, and if you want to get that to follow along, head over to this website here, 3dscans.com, and download the portrait of a man, and you can actually just get that's what I did. So if you want to follow along, just use this stuff. So currently it has a lambda shader assigned, so I'll be just assigning my flat shader, and you can see it will lose all its surface colors. But we want to talk about the curvature shader alone, so I'll just create that for a second, and you can see all the parameters right up front. So if I connect the out color to my flat colors input slot, you already see the output of the curvature node. You can see that around the edges we actually see, to make it simple, we see a black and white mask of rounded edges, and you can definitely specify the width of the edge, so you can make it larger and you should get thicker edges. And you can, similar to the occlusion node, you can adjust the spread, which is just kind of adjusting how far it spreads out. Like the lower the number it gets, the more contrasty and narrower the spread. So a value of 1 is pretty good. And then you can also play around with the threshold, which is just more, it's checking on a specific threshold around the edges, around the normals. It decides when it should use a mask or not. So this is kind of something to play with. It's always different to the surfaces you work with, so this is something to play around as well. And the bias is kind of a fall off from the edge to a flat surface. So how much the bias falls off. Like on 0.5, I think it's a linear fall off. So the lower you get, it gets more like a curve, like a negative. Right. And then if you go positive, it's more like a bent bell-shaped curve. So it's more wide, and then it falls off sharper, and on below 0.5 it's the other way around. And then you have a multiplier of the mask itself. So if you're happy with the results, you could just crank up the multiplier and you get stronger black and white values. And then you can have inclusive and self only. So if you have other objects surrounding it, you can tick self only, and it will only calculate the curvature of the same object. You can also specify a trace set, which is something which you can use if you have a trace set variable on the shape. You can make it either inclusive, so whatever has the same trace set will be included in the curvature, and you can untick the inclusive, so it's excluding this. So this is kind of the principles behind that. Another important thing is the samples. It's not the same as an occlusion samples. It's more like how many rays are being shot against the surface to get a more accurate representation of the surface. So the higher you go here, the more details you will get out of your curvature shader. And then you have the option to use concave or convex. So one is the bulge of the shapes of the curves, and the other one is the inside of the curve. So you can see it's now going more around the edges of the nose, which is concave. And the convex shape is more like a bend stuff. So whatever goes outwards is a convex shader. And you also can include both. So you get an RGB, RNG, like red and green matte for this. So you can actually use color channels to extract this as well. If you want to have this in one shader, it's more efficient than having two shaders. So now comes the next part where I will show you how to connect it up with a range shader just to have a bit more control. So let's say I've got the curvature and I have a range shader, and I connect them up together. I can have more control about the mask itself. So on default nothing happens, but if I specify now my input max to make it a lot lower, maybe 0.3, you can see now we're cranking up the white areas to get more contrast in it. And we can slowly introduce some input min values as well. This was already too much, 0.05, so maybe try 0.1. And you can see now we get a nice contrast around everything. And what we could do now is we can use this mask into a different shader and control maybe the roughness or a bump map maybe, or something like that. So this is everything you need to know for a curvature shader node.